3 years ago, we stopped buying food at the supermarket. Not out of necessity, not because of some crisis that forced our hand, because we found something that the food industry has no interest in telling you about, and once we understood it, going back to the old way felt genuinely absurd. While the people around us watched their grocery bills climb every month, argued about which store had the best deals, and filled trolleys with food that had been grown on the other side of the world and shipped across an ocean, we were walking out to our own ground and picking what we needed, fresh, every day, at no ongoing cost whatsoever. The setup is not what most people picture when they imagine growing their own food. It is not a large plot. It is not a complex system. It is not something that demands agricultural knowledge or years of experience. It comes down to a specific group of plants, chosen for specific reasons, that once established in the ground will continue producing food season after season without being replanted, without synthetic inputs, and without depending on any supply chain at all. I want to explain why that last point matters more than most people currently appreciate. The way that the majority of home growers approach food production follows the same basic logic as industrial agriculture, just at a smaller scale. You buy seeds, you prepare the soil, you plant in spring, you harvest in autumn, and then the whole cycle resets. The following year, you need new seeds, you need fertiliser, you need fuel, or at minimum physical energy, to prepare the beds again. Every single year you are re-entering the supply chain. Every single year the success of that year's food depends on having access to inputs that come from somewhere else. Agricultural researchers and food security analysts have been pointing to the fragility of this model for down decades. A report from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations documented how even small-scale growers who produce food for their own households are exposed to significant risk when any part of the input chain becomes unreliable. Seeds, synthetic fertilizers, and fuel are the 3 most commonly cited pressure points. When all 3 remain available and affordable, annual cropping systems work adequately. When any one of them fails, the system stutters. When multiple inputs fail at the same time, the consequences are severe and immediate. History provides the clearest version of this lesson. The Irish famine of the 1840s is the example that most people know. A near-total dependence on a single annual crop wiped out by a pathogen across successive harvests, resulting in mass starvation and the displacement of millions of people. The pattern it represents, monoculture annual systems under sustained pressure, has repeated itself in different forms in different places throughout recorded history. What agricultural historians consistently identify as the common thread in communities that maintained food security through those events is diversity of planting and, specifically, the presence of perennial food sources that continued producing regardless of what happened to the annual crops around them. Perennial plants live for more than 2 years. Most of them live for considerably longer. They return each growing season from the same root system without needing to be replanted. Their roots go deeper into the soil than annual crops, accessing water and nutrients that shallower-rooted plants cannot reach. Because they do not need to be re-established each year, they eliminate a significant portion of the labor and resource demands that annual growing requires. And because they regenerate themselves, they remove the dependency on purchased seed entirely. Once they are in the ground and established, the supply chain becomes largely irrelevant to your food production. The distinction changes everything when you extend the timeline. For 1 season, an annual vegetable patch is fine. For 5 years, 10 years, or longer, the calculation is different. Annual crops require you to re-enter the system every single spring. Perennials do not. Researchers at agroforestry institutions in both the United States and the United Kingdom have produced consistent findings showing that perennial food systems, properly designed, outperform annual systems in long-term yield, stability, soil health, and resilience to climate variability. These are not fringe conclusions. They represent a substantial and growing body of scientific literature that supports what traditional agricultural communities have known and practiced for generations. The plants on this list have been selected against specific criteria, They need to perform across a broad range of temperate climates, covering the majority of North America and most of Northern and Central Europe. They need to produce meaningful quantities of food, whether that is measured in calories, protein, or micronutrients. They need to tolerate difficult conditions, poor soil, irregular rainfall, periods of neglect, and they need to regenerate themselves without requiring any intervention from you on an annual basis. There is one honest constraint worth stating clearly before going through the list. Perennial plants take time to establish. Some produce usefully in their second year. Some take 3 years to hit full stride. A handful take longer. That is not a disadvantage of the system. It is simply the nature of a different relationship with time. You are not planting for this season. You are planting for the next decade and beyond. The implication of that, which tends to land harder the longer you sit with it, is that the right moment to put these plants in the ground is well before the need for them feels urgent. The establishment period does not compress to fit your schedule. The ground does not care when you decided the situation was serious enough to act. Starting at the bottom of the list and working upward, the first plant is the Siberian pea shrub, Caragana arborescens, which is almost entirely unknown in Western European and North American gardening culture, despite having sustained communities across some of the most inhospitable climates on Earth for centuries. It is a legume native to Siberia and Central Asia, used extensively across Mongolia, the Chinese steppe, and the Canadian prairies, both as a food source and as a land restoration tool. It grows to between 8 and 12 feet in height, survives temperatures as low as -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and thrives in dry, poor, and heavily depleted soils where most other food plants simply cannot establish themselves. Its value is twofold. As a nitrogen-fixing legume, it draws atmospheric nitrogen into the soil through its root system, actively rebuilding fertility in the ground around it over time. Research from land restoration projects across Central Asia and the Canadian prairie has documented measurable improvements in soil nitrogen levels within a few growing seasons of Caragana plantings. At the same time, it produces edible seeds each year from late summer onward, contained in pea-like pods, with a flavor profile sitting somewhere between lentils and chickpeas. A mature shrub yields several pounds of seeds annually. A row of 10 or more plants represents a permanent protein source that simultaneously improves the ground it occupies. Sea kale, Crambe maritima, is a coastal European perennial, with a long cultivation history in Britain that has almost entirely vanished from modern kitchen gardens. Its disappearance reflects changing tastes and the availability of annual alternatives rather than any deficiency in the plant. It grows naturally on shingle beaches and rocky shorelines, which tells you most of what you need to know about its tolerance for poor conditions. From a single plant that returns each year for 10 to 15 years, it offers 3 distinct harvests: tender spring shoots, comparable to asparagus, mature leaves, usable as a brassica green through summer, and flower buds harvested before opening that behave much like broccoli. It prefers neglect, performs worse in rich or wet soils, and is genuinely low maintenance once established from crowns or root cuttings. Jerusalem, artichoke, or sunchoke, is a native North American perennial related to the sunflower that produces calorie-dense tubers underground, while growing 6 to 10 feet tall above it. A single tuber planted in spring will multiply into 5 to 10 pounds of harvestable tubers by autumn. Those tubers can be left in the ground through winter and dug up fresh as needed, which means the soil itself serves as cold storage and no additional preservation infrastructure is required. The plant is aggressive enough once established that managing its spread is the main ongoing task. It tolerates poor soil, drought, and partial shade, and is among the most forgiving food plants available to temperate climate growers. Asparagus carries an unfair reputation as a demanding or luxury crop. In practical terms, it is one of the most efficient perennial vegetables available, producing spears in early spring before most other food plants have broken dormancy, at precisely the time of year when fresh nutrition is most valuable after months of stored food. A productive bed measuring 10 feet by 4 feet will yield 10 to 20 pounds of spears per season across a 6 to 8 week harvest window year after year for 2 decades or more from a single planting. The 2 to 3 year wait for full establishment requires patience, but the return on that patience is a food source that will outlast most other things you plant. Rhubarb deserves more credit than it typically receives in conversations about food resilience. Cold, hardy to zone 3, productive in poor soils, and capable of yielding 5 to 10 pounds of stalks per plant per year for 20 or more years, it is one of the most demonstrably reliable perennial food plants available in cold and temperate climates. Beyond the stalks themselves, the large leaves, though not edible due to their oxalic acid content, function as effective mulch material when laid on surrounding soil, suppressing weeds and returning organic matter to the ground as they break down. In a growing system where purchased inputs are not available, any plant that generates its own fertility contributions is worth more than a straightforward assessment of its edible output would suggest. A single crown divided every few years expands into an ever larger planting, without any purchased seed or outside input. Chives will strike some people as an odd inclusion in a list focused on food security, and the instinct to dismiss a herb as a minor plant is understandable. It is also worth examining. Allium schoenoprasum is cold hardy to zone 3, grows in sun or partial shade, tolerates poor soil, requires almost no maintenance, and returns reliably each year for decades. The allium family has been studied fairly extensively for the organosulfur compounds it contains, which appear to support immune function, a consideration that is not trivial in any situation where access to healthcare has become uncertain. Beyond the nutritional argument, there is a more immediate practical one. When a diet becomes repetitive, which it will, under constrained conditions, appetite fatigue sets in, and people begin eating less than they need. Flavor has real functional value in that context, and chives provide onion-like flavor to almost any dish with minimal effort and zero ongoing cost. Perennial kale, specifically the varieties known as tree collards and walking stick kale, differs from the annual kale. Most people grow in that it is a woody, multi-year shrub capable of reaching 4 to 8 feet in height and producing edible leaves continuously through the growing season, including into mild winters, without any replanting. A single plant can remain productive for 5 to 10 years. Leafy brassicas are among the most micronutrient-dense foods available, providing vitamins A, C, and K alongside calcium and iron, precisely the nutrients that disappear from diets when fresh food becomes scarce. Propagation is done through cuttings rather than seed, which removes any dependency on seed supplies entirely. A cutting of 6 to 8 inches placed in moist soil roots within a few weeks. One plant becomes an unlimited source of further plants. Good King Henry, Blitum bonus henricus, was a widely cultivated European vegetable from medieval times through the 19th century, when it was gradually displaced by annual spinach and other trendier crops. Its decline reflects fashion more than merit. Unlike annual spinach, which bolts and becomes inedible within 4 to 6 weeks as day length increases, Good King Henry does not bolt in the same manner. It produces edible leaves from early spring through to late autumn, a harvest window of roughly 6 months from a plant that requires almost no management after its first season. The young spring shoots can be blanched and eaten like asparagus. The mature leaves cook down like spinach or chard. It is cold hardy to zone 3, tolerates partial shade and poor soil, and once established is genuinely set and forget for 5 to 10 years. Egyptian walking onion, Allium proliferum, propagates itself without any assistance. The plant produces small bulblets at the top of its stalks in place of flowers. As the bulblets mature, their weight causes the stalk to bend until it touches the ground, at which point the bulblets take root and establish new plants nearby. Plant it once in an appropriate spot, and it will slowly colonize the available ground on its own, year after year, without being touched. The green tops are harvestable throughout the growing season, in the same way as spring onions. The bulblets, once mature, can be used in cooking, like small shallots, or pickled for storage. It is cold hardy to zone 3 and thrives in poor soils with minimal water. The top position on this list belongs to American groundnut, Apios americana, which earns it by combining properties that are individually valuable and collectively rare. It is a native North American perennial vine that produces protein-rich tubers underground, while simultaneously fixing nitrogen into the surrounding soil. Dry weight protein levels of 15 to 17% have been recorded in research on the plant, substantially higher than potato, sweet potato, or most other commonly grown root crops. In a food system where animal protein is scarce and legumes are the primary protein source, a perennial root crop that also delivers meaningful protein on its own is a significant thing. The tubers have a nutty, slightly sweet flavor, store in the ground through winter, and can be dug as needed, and can be cooked in the same ways as any other root vegetable. The plant is cold hardy to zone 3, tolerates partial shade and moist soils, and improves the ground around it over successive years through its nitrogen-fixing root activity. What these plants represent collectively is not a list of curiosities or a collection of heritage varieties for enthusiasts. They represent a fundamentally different approach to growing food, one that prioritizes permanence over convenience and long-term stability over the annual reset. The evidence from food security research and from the historical record consistently supports that approach. Perennial systems hold up when annual systems fail. They continue producing when supply chains are disrupted, when seed availability is uncertain, and when the conditions that industrial agriculture depends on become unreliable. The one thing that cannot be negotiated is time. These plants need to be in the ground before they are urgently needed, not at the moment the need becomes obvious. That window exists right now. Whether it remains open is a question nobody can answer with confidence, which is the most straightforward argument for using it while it is there.